everybody. We're at the Imp and the Ogre. My name is Paul.
This is Ryan.
This week we are talking about Jacob's Well.
Yeah, so the details of this adventure, it was originally published in Dungeon Magazine number 43. It's written by Randy Maxwell. Came out in 1993, so this makes it a second edition D&D adventure. And what's interesting about this one is it's actually designed for a single player in sort of second to fourth level range, I think, is what the balance is around. So,
yeah, a little unusual for the things we've been reviewing, but quick synopsis. This adventure was inspired by the Alien movie that was made. So a traveler finds himself, the traveler being you, in Jacob's Well, a small trading outpost. An unwilling NPC births a red slat and the shenanigans ensue, and kind of the hunt to stay alive or find this thing is your mission.
Yeah, that's really funny that you put it that way, because that's what I put. I said it's basically the D&D equivalent of Alien mixed with The Thing. It's got the two kind of components.
I mean, I think in the adventure it says that he was like inspired by the Alien and Sigourney Weaver movie. So.
Well, it's very much that, but I also the fact that it's in winter and the isolated by the weather aspect made me really think of John Carpenter's The Thing. So what did you think? Just general impressions, my friend.
I think it's pretty cool. I think it would be a fun adventure to run if you were a DM and you had a friend that was curious about D&D and what it was all about, and they just wanted a one-on-one thing, and could be fun to play in an evening with your kids, maybe, or a kid, and
it's a bit
gruesome. But you could change it, right? Like, it's a fun kind of like murder investigation, creepy adventure, right? Like, I think the ambiance of the adventure is what makes it good, being in the snow and like, everyone's kind of huddled in a room and you hear a noise somewhere and you go and investigate and you see what happens. I think that type of adventure is kind of neat for one person. It's not like there's no goal really except to live, right? Survive, right? But there's no place to go. You don't have to go do anything. You can barricade yourself. You can hole up with the other NPCs. So I think it's neat. I think it'd be fun to run for someone.
Yeah. I liked it overall, and I agree with you. I don't think there's enough adventures that are designed for smaller groups of people, right? Like, I find it kind of interesting that a lot of games are designed that you need at least 5 people to get together. 6 people. I think it was 4th edition D&D. It was balanced around having 5 players, and I'm like, I don't know that I have that many friends anymore.
Yeah.
Like who could devote the amount of time. I sometimes I feel that a lot of the aspects of D&D and D&D adjacent games have a lot of the historical aspects tied to that. So like, it was a wargaming thing. It was a something you play in the game store, so you'd have a lot of people. And the old games were, you look at the 1st edition adventures, and they're designed for up to 10 to 12 players, where total, levels are up to 40 levels of players and things like that, which is such a foreign idea to me. And I think that's because of the roots being in this sort of mass gaming idea, that there's not a lot of the opposite, when realistically you'd think there should be a lot more options for fewer players, right?
You'd think so. I wonder if that part of the thing, or part of that idea, is that if you were playing D&D when these things were written, say it was in the early 90s, that the only way to play D&D was to show up at the game shop. So if there was 20 people in your town that played D&D, they were all there. So you could, and if it wouldn't make sense if there's 6 people that show up to the game store that run D&D. Well, sorry, we've only got a game for 4, and unfortunately there's not an adventure for 2. So that has something to do with it. And
well, I mean, I get that, but it definitely feels that further iterations of the game have made it harder to be able to actually even find success as a solo PC in the world. And granted, even at this point, there's a lot of NPC help, right? Like, but due to the nature of the game, as it's designed to be a team sport, if you will, the toolkits complement each other so well that it makes it very difficult to be completely self-sufficient. So that's probably most of the reason. Fun would it be if there was one class that was just like the uber class that could do everything?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it wouldn't be very much fun, but I wonder if also too the idea of dying is fun, but the idea of staying dead is not fun. So, I mean, in this adventure, if you're knocked out or killed, well, that's it, right? There's no one there to save you. So it's this like strength in numbers situation where like it would be fun for you to die in this adventure if you had a cleric that could heal you back up and stabilize you, right? So I think maybe adventures were written partially for that as they progress, that things that were dangerous are still dangerous, but they're not going to kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would agree with that statement.
Right? Like going and investigating the snowy roof where you slip and fall 20 feet when you've got 5 hit points could just kill you and you could freeze to death outside.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a good way to think of how D&D has evolved since these early days, where the idea of danger
is more appealing than danger.
Than actual danger, right? Like, death isn't really something that should happen, quote unquote, you know, in more recent design games, just due to the nature of the narrative of it, right? I mean, if you look at the published stuff for the most part for 5th edition, it's all... Not all, I mean, there's exceptions, but a lot of it are these large mini campaigns. And as somebody who's run a bunch of Pathfinder adventure paths, having someone actually die in the middle of an adventure path or long form narrative campaign is a huge pain in the butt. Because how do you bring in a replacement character to, the close-knit team that has all these links to the politics of the area or what have you?
True. Yeah.
It's like, he's right Junior next to the dead character's name and just keep going. Like, literally, that's part of the problem sometimes. But, I to get back to the original point, I do kind of wish that there was more options when it comes to this. I mean, most adventures, and we've read a bunch of them at this point, that they do give you tips on how to scale the adventure if you're running with fewer players or more players, but I do wish there was more written modules where it was designed to be run with, say, 2 people. Especially when you're trying to introduce, I think you said this already, but to introduce D&D to new players, it would be better to be able to introduce it in smaller groups. Like a one-on-one session, I think, is a lot less intimidating than inviting someone to join a group of like 5 other people that they may not know. That it's less intimidating to learn the rules and get a feel for it in a more intimate setting, if you will. Yeah,
this adventure would be a good like Adventure 0, where you could become make your character after this one if you chose. Sorry,
but that being said, actually, I think just before we get off this topic, this makes sense. But I actually think that while this is designed for 1 player, you could easily run this for 2 or 3, just because there are so many NPCs that are designed to fill some of the voids in there. You could just replace that NPC with an actual player and not lose much from it. So I think this one actually is scalable to more players, easier than a lot of games would be to scale down to fewer.
Yeah, and if you were running it for more people, it avoids the trap of like, why do people know each other? Well, this is a place that people congregate in anyway. There's a storm, so you're all in the inn, right? It's like you just know each other from being stuck there together.
It's stuck in the proximity. But anyways. What else before we get into it, I'm trying to remember if I had anything else I wanted to say. Oh, I did have one complaint, that the adventure is pretty railroady. By its very design, it's episodic, which I don't mind episodic adventures. Like, there's a lot of time jumps, because otherwise it'd be kind of boring to role play 3 hours in the common room eating lunch or whatever, right? Like, that gets to be a bit tedious. But because there are triggered events, if you will, it is very reactive. That's the word I'm looking for. Like, there are some things that the players, or player, I guess, could do proactively, but a lot of it is reactive. And actually, that just popped into my brain. That might be the reason why this adventure is designed for 1 player, and one of the pitfalls that would occur if you had multiple players doing it is that if you have a bunch of players, they can accomplish more proactively than one person can.
That's true. Yeah.
And that might be a balance issue that could come up. Also, I think we mentioned earlier this is kind of potentially deadly. And I do think that the survival of your one PC really depends on the class that they are. Because like you said, I don't know if we're going to mention it again, but like you can end up falling off the roof.
Yeah.
And if you're a magic user with 4 hit points, it's like a 50-50 chance that you're going to die.
You should maybe not go on the roof
you should be,
in the first place. Yeah.
That would be a good point. But, I mean, there is effectively a whole other adventuring party of random NPCs in there.
Yeah.
But because there's some situations where you are likely to take damage, a fighter or a paladin or even a cleric, something with a reasonable armor class and some hit points is much more likely to make it out of this alive, which makes sense, right? There's a slad that's in here, so it can one-shot most second-level PCs, right, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, success, I think, is not guaranteed in this adventure anyway by the ending, so...
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. I think success is not assumed.
No, not at all. So, I mean, going back to the episodic nature of this adventure, it's broken into, I think, 4 days and nights that you're spending there. And there's kind of trigger events in each of the days that make you go investigate something.
So the hook. You want to do the hook? Should I do the hook?
Go ahead, because I don't have it written down. I mean,
well, I mean, it's not clever or anything like that.
You travel there.
Yeah. Basically, the whole adventure takes place in a wilderness trading post / tavern / inn called Jacob's Well. So the hook is basically you're traveling through the wilderness and a blizzard blows in and you make it to this place to find shelter. So you're snowed in due to bad weather with a bunch of other travelers.
I will say, like, yes, you're right. I liked in this adventure that you could lose the adventure before you even start, because in the first part of the adventure, you're just all in the inn conversing, and I don't think Jacob, the guy who owns the inn, is a particularly nice guy, and there's the opportunity to get into a fight with him.
Oh, he's an orc.
Yeah, half-orc, yeah. You could end up dying right away if you decide to fight, or killing Jacob, which I don't think would be good for anybody in the end, but...
Oh, yeah, he's got a zero-tolerance policy and a big crossbow,
yeah.
So if you just, like, cause trouble, he doesn't even warn you, he just, like, pulls off the crossbow and shoots you.
Yeah.
It's no fighting, no stealing. Those are the rules. And that just reminded me, I really like the setup to it, that to get to the compound, you have to walk through a graveyard, and this is the graveyard of everybody that's died
at Jacob's
Well. All right, so all the gravestones all say things like thief and fighter, gun to, like it's just all the what's the word I'm looking for here? And all the people that were staying there that died, you broke the rules, are buried right into it. And I thought that was really cool from a tonal standpoint, that you really sort of get a feel for the kind of place this is. This isn't a nice, cozy, friendly type of establishment. This is a dangerous, gritty, and sort of carrying on with that tone is, Jacob, if that is his name, I guess,
I think so.
Is a half-orc. There's actual orcs staying in the inn, and because this is, he's an equal opportunist, merchant, he'll trade with everybody and anybody, so there's like an orc chieftain and the bodyguards there as well. And I think I like the idea of this being sort of like a neutral ground type of situation, that you can have a bunch of different people that might stab each other if they ran into each other outside of the area, but because of the harshness of the rules, that everybody is forced to get along inside. And I like that just from a general design standpoint. I think it's a fun setup.
Which is sort of funny because you can kind of befriend the orcs later on in the adventure if you do right by them. And then I could see yourselves going forward in the adventure and being like, orcs aren't that bad, but we're still here to kill them all.
Yeah. It's a very nuanced depiction of orcish culture in this. They're not mindless murder machines. They're just,
different race.
They're doing their own thing.
So it does outline in the beginning section the weather conditions that you're supposed to roll for every such and such hours, and I think that's supposed to play a major part in the adventure, which also lends to why it would be bad to be maybe a bow-using class or a spell caster, because certain conditions, if you get into the heavy snow, high winds, or blizzard conditions, you get minuses to your rolls on ranged attacks and large percentages of failure to failing to cast your spells. So if you are in the bad weather conditions, you're going to be hindered even more as a spellcaster, which would then favor being a fighter or some other melee.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, class. I think if I was going to run this for somebody just as a one-off, I'd specifically guide them to what classes are more likely to find success. Because, there's a lot of things that are stacked up against the, ranged users, casters, even rogues to a certain extent, just because of their squishiness.
Yeah, and I think if you were going to have a spellcaster and they wanted to run this, I think it would be okay as the DM to tell them that in these conditions, you have a 50% chance to fail your spells that have a verbal component. You do have an 80% chance of spell failure in blizzard conditions. So just so that they know what they're getting themselves into, so they can either pick the proper toolkit to be useful or just not play that class in the adventure.
Alternatively, you could just have different, if you're, say if you're going to be a rogue, you get to start as a 4th level rogue or a 4th level magic user versus, or versus a 2nd level paladin.
Right.
Just to make it fair, I'm kind of all for dangerous and conditions that can kill your character and whatnot, but it's little stacked against the player in some situations. And if this was your first D&D adventure ever, it would just feel kind of unfun and unfair when you're just like, I cast my spell. It's like, oh yeah, no, it's windy.
You can't do it.
Yeah, you can't do anything. Well, that was my only spell slot for the day. Oh, okay. All right. I guess you got a dagger now.
Yeah.
Go fight that interdimensional, monster.
Trigger 1 on day 1. Everyone's waiting out the storm. You hear a scream from the upstairs. Basically, everyone rushes up to look at it, and what do you find? You find a body with a hole in their chest, and everyone kind of goes like, huh.
Well, it's not, basically, what happens here is some of the NPCs are a group of barbarians, and they had a sick friend. And they brought the sick friend in, and this is what you find is the dead sick friend. So needless to say, the barbarians are going to, his buddies are going to be a little distraught over the situation. And this sort of brings up a point that I thought was important is in the lead up to this sort of inciting incident, I think it's important to have interactions with the other NPCs. Like, I think this adventure works best if it starts off as a really social encounter, right? To get a feel for who's there and what's going on, right? It doesn't have to be, right? There's nothing stopping the player from just coming in, paying for the room, and just like sitting down until something happens. But I feel that for this adventure, the more the player interacts with the other NPCs to get a feel for them and the differences in their characters, it's a richer experience. Like, I think this is one where you could definitely have a lot of social interactions, because it can be a very passive game if you wanted to. Like, there's enough stuff built into it that the player could just sort of respond to everything.
Yeah.
But I could also see it being really great if you had a player playing a bard or a paladin, something with a good charisma score, and like really stepping up in a okay, you call 911 and then you go for help, right? Like someone really taking control of the situation, because there's a lot of other people, like NPCs around. You could get into that sort of management and coordination and like, all right, buddy system.
True,
you could go with the game in more of that type of a style. And I think it would be a richer experience for a player that was really into the social aspects a little bit more, even if they were doing it for like nefarious means. Like you're a rogue with a good charisma score, and you're like convincing, all right, you all go look over there, and then you go rob them. You know,
steal
like,
their stuff. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And that being said, if you do want to run it more of a social encounter, I found it's difficult to have people be social without prompting. So I think as a DM, giving you're in the inn, there's people, isn't enough, right? Let them know that there's maybe a group of barbarians in the corner. You notice that they look distraught, and you can kind of hear them mumbling about their sick friend. Give them prompts to go speak to groups of people, tell them about the orcs a little bit. Like, I think it's okay in this instance to divulge information that the DM would know in order to prompt social encounters, because it's tough if you're just one person sitting there and you're in an inn. What do you say? I'll have a beer.
Yeah.
Okay. Like.
Oh yeah. No, I think it really is on the DM here to describe the situation well.
And the mood. I think the mood is important in this adventure as tension rises with everybody and between different groups. So maybe read aloud the boxes that are in the adventure more verbatim than, it's okay to be on script, I think, a little bit in these situations to help promote. Maybe if it is a new player, then being shy, I guess, in D&D and not knowing what to do. But I have found through experience it's difficult to prompt social encounters without any indicators. Yeah.
I mean, you could also just... you could narrate interactions between the NPCs if needs be. I don't like doing that so much just because it kind of becomes even more passive.
Yeah.
Right? When the DM's just sort of like doing all of this stuff and the players just watching you perform. To me, that's not what D&D is, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's going to depend on your player, and if they're not outgoing, if they don't like that, this might not be the best adventure to run for them. On the other hand, because the option is there, it does a good job of illustrating what D&D can be.
Yeah.
Because not all adventures have that as an option even.
Yeah.
Right? If you're just doing a straight dungeon crawl, there's not always NPC interactions.
Right.
And then this is an adventure where, while not required, there can be a fair bit of it.
And I think, like, maybe now that we're on talking about this a little bit more, I find foreshadowing like a useful tool in D&D, and that, like, if you're sitting in the inn, you can describe that maybe there's the 3 barbarians there and one of them pukes, they're all drinking, one of them pukes, they take him upstairs and 2 come back down, and then all of a sudden the hole in the chest doesn't seem so outrageous if you don't have any background music. There was something going wrong from the get-go.
Yeah. I think mentioning the dark looks that people give the orcs sitting in the corner, like you should definitely try to set the stage, because it all kind of plays out pretty quickly, and knowing the temperament of the different NPCs, I think, goes a long way to make this a more fun adventure.
Yeah.
That being said, there's a ton of NPCs.
Yeah.
Right?
But it also could help your PC choose a side, maybe, or side with a group of people, because decisions that get made later on by groups might inform what your player wants to do, right? So the dead NPC is, in fact, the birth of the red slad. Your PC may not find that. I think if they get up there quick enough, they can see it scurrying away, maybe, or out the window.
Well, the window's broken, I think.
Right,
there.
yeah.
So something escaped.
Yeah, if you investigate, you could see that, the glass has fallen on the outside, so something broke out, not in. And then it transitions into the night portion of the first day, and that you would again be sitting and doing whatever, having chats, and someone exclaims fire. If you choose to go help, you see that the barracks are aflame. And then you can kind of investigate and see why this fire started, and that it was from oil poured through a loose stone in the chimney or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. I think some important points to point out that there's no guarantee that the player actually ever figures out what is this thing.
No,
right?
unless you could see it and know for somehow. It's pretty quick and shifty. Like, it's not meant to be there by the time you get there.
Well, there's later in the adventure, there's definitely opportunities for people to see it. Like, it's not always in the shadows, but it's not a common creature. So if your player doesn't have the appropriate skills or knowledge base, there's no reason to know what it is.
Yeah.
So that kind of horror aspect of it is important, right? So like nobody really knows what it is and all of these issues. You kind of gloss over the point, but like getting on the roof, that could have happened. After it, right? There's you can smart PCs, quote unquote, will notice that there's no marks in the snow underneath the window. So it didn't, whatever went out the window didn't drop to the ground. So they might climb up onto the roof where you can fall and die. Like it'd be the world's shortest adventure. And that's actually one thing I really liked about using the environment to help to inform sort of the investigation, because there's this blizzard going on. There's tracks in the snow, and it's snowing enough that fresh tracks, and you can distinguish new tracks from old tracks. So I thought that was really clever, that all throughout the adventure that information plays a role. So your player should be asking about that and can use that information, and they might not catch on immediately with this first situation, but it becomes pretty clear later on. But anyways, the fire aspect kills a bunch of guards, I think, from smoke inhalation. Basically. And what this sort of starts the first of many hiding situations that the creature has. And that's what I thought was kind of interesting in the adventure as a whole, is basically it can end at any point with success. Like, this is an adventure that you can win in the first night.
Well, you probably have the most chance of, like, it's got a downward curve of success, this adventure, right? Like, the more, if you have a high charisma and you can rally people to go find what this thing in the first couple of encounters and fight it, you might win, know? But if you get to the end, your chance of success are zero pretty much, right? So, like, if it gets to its adulthood, it's zero. You lose. But yeah, you're right. It's fun that you can find it anywhere at any time of day, and
well, it's hiding places, right? So based off of where the player looks, and their roles, they might be able to find it. Because right now, like after the distraction of the fire, it's like hiding in the
stable,
the scullery or something like that. I think. Anyways, it's hiding someplace, but there's a 50% chance of detection. So all it really would require is for somebody, presumably the player, to actually look in there, make the roll, find the little creature, and then everybody just sort of smashes it, right? Like, because at this point, everyone's still alive, and with the exception of the one barbarian, and would quickly overwhelm the creature, even though it's still dangerous. This is as easy as it gets. So I thought it was kind of interesting that this adventure could be over in a heartbeat. And as you said, the longer it goes on, the chance of success decreases. So in terms of pacing, I don't know how I feel about that. That there's this whole adventure that you'd be putting all this time into prepping to run smoothly, all these NPCs, and you get all this together. And then, the fire burns and the PC goes like, I bet you this is a distraction. I'm going to go look in the kitchen. He's like, make a roll. You find it. I stab it. You win. All right.
I mean, you could suss out too, like, if you didn't want it to end like that, I think you'd kind of be taking away from the PC for being clever. But if you knew they were sort of onto something right away and you wanted to keep running it, you could like go back to the end. You find another hole in the chest, like you could keep it running.
I don't think I wouldn't sabotage my player's success that way. But just from a DM standpoint, I thought it was kind of interesting that I could see myself spending all this time getting ready to run a session, and we're over in like the first 30 minutes or whatever, so you have to have a backup to what happens next type of thing. But I just thought that was sort of interesting, because the expectation might be the right word, but to succeed, the player needs to find it before like the third night or whatever it is. So there's this time pressure on them that they don't know about from the get-go. because they won't know what it is, and like even if they know it's a slad, they may not know what the life cycle and growth rate
Exactly, yeah. You did say that this is a railroady adventure, but I think I'm okay with it because there's like 8 points to get off the tracks.
Yeah.
There's stopping points all throughout the adventure, and it's either because you died or choose to do something else or won, right? So it's like, it may be a railroady adventure, but like you can get off at so many different points in the adventure via success or failure or death or giving up that it makes it okay to be a railroad adventure. So after the big barracks event and you don't find it, you go to bed, I guess, and you wake up.
Breakfast is late.
Yeah. And huzzah, there's another missing NPC. I think the kitchen.
It's the cook's missing.
The cook's missing,
so
yeah.
you go downstairs for breakfast.
Yeah.
And there's no breakfast.
I don't know if you find his body or where you find it later on in the adventure.
It's findable. I can't remember where they stuffed it. It might be like in the privy or something like that.
Right.
Like the corpse is in the complex, something like that, but it's partly eaten and stuffed away. So if it's a thorough enough investigation, the corpse should be able to be found,
and I think it's probably found easily. Like, I don't think the slad's hiding its tracks when it's dragging but anyway, the big event in the morning of day 2 is that the guards who are hired by Jacob to defend Jacob's well all get up together and they decide that they're leaving. They've had enough. They don't want to die. They said they're going to risk the storm versus an unknown threat, basically. So this is another exit point to the adventure that you could choose to take, which would end in death.
it's mean.
This
is a mean decision.
So if you decide to join these guards and leave, they'll travel for about an hour or so into the wilderness and then just jump you and kill you and steal your things. Right. So yeah, you left to death. It is a little bit mean, but they're mercenaries.
You could run away once they turn on you, but I thought that was kind of a trap. It's a trap decision. It's not even like an encounter. It's a trap.
So hopefully maybe you could play earlier in the adventure that these guards aren't the nicest people to give maybe an indication that it could be safer to stay in town than it would be to leave with them, whether or not by describing their demeanor or their mood or the way that they are. They look shifty and shady and they're obviously sell swords and they're just here to make a buck. And they're out at the first sign of danger. What kind of guards are they? So hopefully you don't go with them and just die. But I thought it was, maybe a bit cruel, but kind of funny.
And then I don't know. I think it was, it's not the first time we've come across that in an adventure, and it's not the last time where there's decisions that are presented as the correct way to do something that end up resulting in sort of death and dismemberment. And just from a DM standpoint, like, I don't know, it goes against my style, let's say, of DMing. Like, I like giving my players options, and I don't think they always has to be good things as a consequence of their decisions, but I don't think it's fair without a ton of foreshadowing to have something like this, where it seems like the logic, there's a monster, it's killing everything, hey, a bunch of armed people are leaving, it makes seem like a good idea to go with them. I think you need to make it clear that, like, none of the other guests
are going with them.
Or, you just really need to foreshadow it that this is probably not a good idea. And if they ignore all the foreshadowing and, like, warnings, and even maybe just have one of the merchants be like,
Are you sure?
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about the guy with one ear. You know, like, you can just, you
give them fair warning. Give them an opportunity to get out of it.
I just know if you played this wrong, like, you just made it like, the guards are going and they're offering,
protection for those coming with them.
Protection for anyone who wants to go with them. Like, you present it like that, suddenly it seems like, that's the reasonable thing to do. And then you're like, okay, and you go with them, and then they pull out their swords and they stab you. And if it was presented that way, if I was the player, I'd be like, that's garbage.
Yeah.
Like, that would be unsatisfying.
Don't intentionally trap them.
Yes.
Basically, which you could do. Be nice.
Be nice.
The next event in day 2 is like the one I think I like the most, because I like nothing events where All of a sudden there's a fire explosion upstairs, and you run upstairs and you just find a scared wizard that some snow fell off the roof and it just blew up half his room, and he's patting out the flames or whatever. So a nothing encounter just made me laugh because
I also really enjoyed the misdirection aspect of it, you know? And I think it's important for this adventure to have situations like that where there is the yells from upstairs and everybody runs up ready to, fight the creature, and it's the wizard's room lit his room on fire because he was scared. And there's another event like that, and I think the next day, one of the barbarians falls down the stairs. So thump, 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 and everyone's like, ah, and it's just like, no, sorry, I missed a step. And I think that's good design to have, especially when they're supposed to be on edge and everyone's going to be super primed to cause, violence, if you will, to have situations where nothing happens, and to create situations where people might be more inclined to ignore a noise because not every noise is important.
Right.
But after that, we have the orcs get ambushed, right?
Yeah, and I can't remember where this happens, if it's actually in the inn.
It's in the inn. I think it's on the second floor.
So commotion once again, and once investigated, the whole head of an orc is missing. It's been bitten off, and another one has his arm gouged open. And
this is an important encounter because this is the first time, realistically, you get a look at the monster. So you actually catch this in action. And of all of the times, this is probably the best chance to deal with it. Because you see it in action, it flees out a window again, and this is the best time to
follow it,
find it, and kill it. Because I believe after this point, it undergoes a round of metamorphosis, and suddenly becomes like a million times tougher. It's not the final, molting or whatever it is, but killing it in its larval stage is the best opportunity, because it just gets harder and harder.
And this is the best chance too, because in this molting period, it is under a significant penalty to combat. So it automatically loses its initiative. It goes last in every single round, and it's at a -1 to attack rolls. So yeah, you should probably go find it at this point. If you don't rally the troops, well, you had it coming.
Well, then it just starts ramping up, right? Because they basically have a whole day to try to track it down. If they don't, you lose more NPCs the next night, right? Because then there's more shouts from upstairs, and basically the wizard NPC gets murked by the Sladen. Again, I like this encounter, like top to bottom. The way it's put together is really thematically awesome. So basically, the wizard gets jumped by the Slad, manages to cast a web spell before dying. So you make it upstairs, and there's the Slad trapped in the web. You have the wizard's corpse also trapped in the webbing. And this is an important point because it illustrates that it's changed, right? This is after the metamorphosis, so it's bigger and scarier than it was the last time you saw it, right? When it attacked the orcs the night before. So this illustrates that it's growing. If that wasn't clear before, it's getting bigger. This is a big deal. And then I liked how it gets away, quote unquote, or can get away, in that the orc chieftain, who's just, who's lost a bodyguard and the other one's like dying, just attacks it with a flame, his torch, which lights the webs on fire, which frees the Slad, and provides with the opportunity to get away. And realistically, though, this is the last time to actually win. Right? Because you can track it down. It's tougher now as a juvenile Slad, I think is what it is now. But again, you have some barbarians. You have the orc chieftain. I think there's a cleric. One of this is kind of what made me smile a little bit, is to make it basically have all the different characters available in case you needed them. Like the serving guy is actually a halfling cleric, I think, or a gnome cleric. I can't remember which it was.
Yeah.
That's basically stuck because it's too dangerous out there. So he's just hanging around waiting to see if he can hire some security to escort him the right of the way. So he's just working for room and board, but he happens to be like a cleric. So if you need healing, he's there. I'm just like, okay.
Everybody's special, you know?
Everybody's special.
Yeah.
No, it's just everybody's got a secret identity.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the point where there's the trappers, the merchants or whatever, the fur guys decide to leave. So the other, or one of the major remaining groups decides to make a run for it. And again,
another event the Slad attacks one of their mules when he's getting one of the trappers is hooking it up and kills the trapper as well. You could find it here again, so another final opportunity to maybe win.
Absolutely last chance, because following attacking and killing the mules and whatnot, that night it metamorphoses into an adult. And then I just wrote PC is doomed.
Yeah, so adult Slads are extraordinarily powerful. They've got the gate ability, and at that point they would gate in other members of the Sladdy, I guess, and just take over, right? And
it suddenly just becomes a full-on
invasion.
Limbo invasion.
Yeah.
Which I did think while reading this, how cool would it be to run this as a prequel to your actual adventure that's all about dealing with a Slad invasion, right? Like,
it would be cool. That's why I think I said earlier, like it would be a fun adventure zero for people, right? And like you could almost plan for no success, and if there was success, like maybe another Slad somewhere else becomes an adult and gates people in, but you could hand out character sheets that are, you're the cleric servant and you're the orc chieftain and you're the random traveler, and just let people play as their roles that are the people already here, and then nobody survives anyway, or it's a one-off and you just don't play those characters again, and you create your own new characters in the next adventure series.
Yeah, no, that's a cool idea. I also thought, I made a note here that you could maybe run this as like a funnel adventure. And I don't know if you know what funnel adventures are. Dungeon Crawl Classics uses it, but it's the idea that you have to start off, before you become an adventurer, you were something else. So when you play one of these adventures, you make like 4 or 5 NPCs.
Yeah.
And in surviving the first adventure, you become an adventurer.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be kind of funny that you could run this as a funnel adventure where you have your group of players that collectively between them have maybe like 20 NPCs in the inn, and it's all about these. So you'd have all the red shirts that are just constantly dying, but because there's so many of you, that by the end of dealing with the Slad, if you are successful, maybe you have a couple that survive.
It'd be pretty funny, like if one guy's like, "I'm the fighters," and you're like, "There's a fire in the barracks. Hand me 7 of your character sheets." Why? Oh, they all burned alive. So what do you think?
Finishing it off, I liked it tonally. I liked it conceptually. I think there's pitfalls. I thought I like the fact that you have to succeed, you have to finish the adventure before you're done the adventure. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of stuff in there that's included so the DM can just narrate what goes wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Like compared to a more traditional adventure where you're just going through the different challenges and then you succeed when you get to the end. Right? Like you get to the last page of the adventure and yay, the heroes won. In this adventure, if the PCs actually make it to the last page of the adventure, they lose.
Right.
Right? Like this is an adventure that's all about stopping the disaster before it's too late. And it provides you with the tools and information to do so really early. So I like it on the whole, but if you found the baby Slad the first night, it would be an unsatisfying adventure.
True.
Like there's this sweet spot in the middle. Like dealing with it after the orc attack or the mage attack after it's become a juvenile, that's the sweet spot. Like you got to deal with it in either of those encounters. And if you do, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It would have been a very satisfying adventure at that point. But if you are too early, I think it's unsatisfying. And if it's too late, you lose, which might be unsatisfying too. So that was my only concern with it. Just seeing like how unsatisfying it could be. Not just sort of like, oh, that was okay. Be like, oh, okay. Like, and if you finished early, your player wouldn't even know. You as a DM would be like, oh, okay. All right, like, because they don't know what they're missing.
Yeah, and it is fun. Like, I think the fun is seeing the danger and, like, the gore and the chaos that the thing's causing. And I think one of the things that I liked about this adventure is the feeling that it gives, you know, all these different groups that are in this sort of sanctum of you're in it together. Yeah. You know, there you got orcs and humans and sellswords and all these people, but it's just like you're in it together. You know, there's a common enemy, a common goal. And if you finish early, you never get to build that camaraderie and move forward beyond it. But I think you'd be cheating. Well, I think it would be fun to run as a DM, so you'd be ruining it for yourself kind of and the PC if they're just like, oh yeah, it was a baby lizard, whatever. Yeah. What now?
Well, yeah, exactly. And the other thing as a DM I thought was a bit potentially problematic is there's basically a whole adventuring party worth of NPCs in there. So there is a lot of work for the DM. So it's to make it feel alive, you got to narrate and then role play a lot of NPCs, and you have all of their toolkits that can be brought to bear. I mean, there's a ranger, a cleric, some barbarians, there's the orc fighters, there's so on and so forth. There's a lot of stuff. So again, like if you got into the combat, like let's say as a juvenile, you collect all the other team and you track it down and you go to fight it, it's going to be a lot of rolling by the DM, right?
I mean, you could prepare maybe for that by handing over like simplified character sheets for NPCs to your player and being like, okay, now you are everybody, and let them do it as well, to maybe offload some of that. And another thing that could become mechanically tiresome is you sort of need to do track time because the weather changes throughout the adventure. I think every 3 or 4 hours or something, you're supposed to make rolls to see what the weather changes into. So, and you do kind of need to keep track of that because it
affects whether you can track the
exactly right. So, I mean, you could have bad weather the entire time and never be able to track it. Or you could have fair weather the entire time, and it makes the adventure easier or harder. Which is, give or take, right? Yeah. So
I think I'd like it better, and would modify it if I ran it. Would be to maybe not have the NPCs have PC classes. I like the idea maybe more. Putting more of the emphasis on the player as the focus of the success. So maybe you can still have a bunch of other NPCs there that maybe they have success. They could be warriors or adepts or what have you, but I like the idea of the player being the most important person there, and maybe create a system where to deal with the threat, you have to be more creative. Like you can't just have a toe-to-toe fight. Like maybe, you got to get all the spears and you make a big spear wall, or you trap it someplace and you light it on fire. Like I like the idea of maybe making it a little bit more tricky to deal with versus just saying like, well, okay, well then the ranger's going to shoot the arrows and the wizard's going to cast the spell to, which again, as the DM, you're running all of this. I would think it'd be maybe more rewarding if you just give a bunch of tools to your player, make it clear that a toe-to-toe fight might not be the best way of going about it, and then try to have them, give them the challenge of coming up with a way of dealing with this that's not just find it and then have a standard combat encounter. Because I think that would be kind of fun, is if it, part of the adventure was trying to devise a trap to catch it and all of this type of thing to deal with it versus just being survive and then find. So I think there's ways of expanding this to make it a lot more interactive and potentially cooler.
Yep, I agree. So would you run it or leave it?
I don't know that I'd run it.
Yeah.
I think there's situations where it could come up. I like the idea, and I could see myself stealing the concept, but I think I'd have to change it enough to run it the way I'd want to, that it kind of wouldn't be the same adventure anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also think it'd be more fun if it was like a doppelganger. If it was a little more thing and less alien, where it could look like anybody, like
It could be anyone in the room.
exactly,
Yeah.
like to build up, and even just switching it to maybe being a doppelganger, then it's kind of cool because it also takes away, like, you don't want to go with the guards because maybe it's one of the guards, right?
Right.
Like,
Turns into a little more murder mystery.
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
and ramps up the paranoia.
Well, where were you during all this? Well, I was upstairs with Joe, and it's like, no,
Yeah.
Joe was in the bathroom. Yeah. Yep. That could be good too.
So I thought that would be kind of a fun way of doing it. So I like the idea of a solo adventure. I think it totally works, but just based off of what I do and the types of games I like to run, I don't know that I could see myself running it as is. So anyways, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd probably leave it. I don't think I'd run it. I think it's a good adventure. Maybe I could find a place for it. But
Well, I mean, I think it just fits a particularly small niche, right? Like
Yeah.
it's designed to do one thing, and I think it does that one thing reasonably well. But it really depends on having the perfect situation, having a solo player that wants to try it, and it being the type of player that would enjoy this type of adventure. Because I wouldn't say this is a stereotypical D&D adventure at all.
Not at all,
It's
yeah.
its own thing. I think
Yeah.
it could be fun, but under the right conditions only.
yeah, I think that's all we have to say about this adventure, guys. As always, thanks for listening. Please email us at theimpandogre@gmail.com if you have suggestions, or hit us on the Twitters at theimpandogre. We'd like your suggestions, and we'll get to adventures if you have suggestions.
We are pretty lazy about getting back to some of the stuff, but we do check it, and we will reply.
That's right. So I think next week we are tackling Death, Frost, Doom on Lamentations of a Flame Princess. So tune in then. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.